Hello. This is the first part of our video overview of DataGrip, the SQL IDE from JetBrains. We'll tell you about what DataGrip can do and how it can save you time, and we hope it will be useful for you. This is what the DataGrip UI looks like. On the left side of the screen, you can see the databases tree, which includes all the data sources you work with. It's quite easy to add a new data source. In fact, let's do that now. When you add a new data source, you'll see that DataGrip supports lots of databases, from the very popular SQL databases like Oracle or MySQL, to some no-SQL data sources like Cassandra or MongoDB. One important thing before we start. I'll be saying the shortcuts that work on macOS. At the bottom of the screen, you will see the shortcuts for Windows and Linux. Often they're the same or pretty similar, but occasionally they're completely different. We will be working with the PostgreSQL data source, but nearly everything we will show you today is available for all the databases we support. When we create the new data source, we specify its name and input the port. We don't put anything special into the host field because the database is on the local host, but we should input our credentials. Then I click Test Connection to make sure that everything is okay. We can go to the Options tab and, for example, tick the Read Only checkbox. When this option is selected, DataGrip will not let you make any changes to your data source, which is extremely useful when you're working with a production data source. There are many other options here, like Keep a Live Query, Disconnect after some time, and more. In the SSH/SSL tab, you can specify the SSH tunnel or SSL certificate for your connection. And in the Schemas tab, you can choose which particular schemas or databases you would like to see in your database tree. This option can really come in handy if you have a lot of them. When I click OK, I see my new data source added to the database tree on the left-hand side of the screen. When I expand all the nodes, I see my tables, views, and routines, along with all the other objects. And when I click on this one of three button, I can again choose which schemas and databases I want to see in the tree, and which ones I don't. There's also a speed search, which will help you find the object you need. For example, when I type PAY, I see the tables that begin with these three letters. But I can also use abbreviations. For example, if I type PPO1, DataGrip will treat this as an abbreviation and locate the corresponding table. It is important to keep in mind that a matching database object will only be highlighted if its node is already open. To keep your data sources organized, it's a good practice to put them into groups. If you press F6 on a data source, you can put it into an existing group or create a new one. There's also an option to hide the objects you don't need. For example, in our schema, we have several tables that begin with the word payment, and these tables are actually the partition tables for the payment table. Let's imagine we don't want to see them in the tree. In this case, we go to the Schemas tab in the data source properties and specify the regular expression that will hide these tables. By the way, the connection between various tables in your schema can be displayed in a diagram. Just invoke the context menu and choose Show Visualization. This will build a big diagram based on your schema. You can zoom in and out to explore all the relations. Another useful feature is the ability to copy your data source and paste it here or into another IDE. If you put the cursor on the data source and press Command-C, an XML snippet will be created on your clipboard. You can then just paste this XML snippet as a new data source in a database tool window, either inside the same IDE or in some other JetBrains IDE. The only thing you will need to specify again is the password, because that isn't copied with the data source. Color settings. You can specify the color for any data source, which is quite handy if you want to distinguish your production data source from your staging one or your test one. So if I choose blue, this color will be used for everything related to the data source, the database tree, the query console, the result sets, associated files, and so on. The query console is where you write and run queries. It's currently already open, but if you want to open it again, you should go to the context menu of the data source. Let's create a simple query to fetch the data. The simple select query can be performed really quickly. Just type SEL, press Tab, choose the needed table, and here we are. The mechanism I just used is called live templates. These templates are just pre-built snippets for some of the most common use cases. If you press Command G, you can see the list of all the templates available to you. In the left part of this list, there are abbreviations. You can either type them or choose them from the list. Let's choose the INS live template, which will help us generate the simple insert statement. So I invoke it and choose the table. Completion gives me the column list, and then I put in the values. You can actually edit existing live templates or create new ones. Let's go to Settings and search for the Live Template setting. Here we see several sections. Right now, we need the SQL section, and selecting it brings up a list of all the templates. Let's update the SEL template, which is the template for simple select. We can use this variable $and, which identifies where the caret will be placed after you generate your query. I'll place it just after the wildcard. Let's see what we get as a result. The caret's now placed after the wildcard when you invoke the live template. So as you can see, templates are pretty customizable. By the way, using wildcards is actually not the best practice, right? This presents us with an opportunity to learn a very, very important shortcut, Alt-Enter. It will show you various intention actions. We can invoke it in this particular place in our code. This list here gives you the option to expand the column list, and you can do this. Now let's run our first query and see our first result. You can see that the toolbar of the result set and the session panel on the left are also blue. I'll now turn off coloring because I don't really need it. Let's talk about coding assistance. The first, and maybe the most important part of coding assistance is code completion. For example, if you type J here, the IDE anticipates that you might want the join clause to be here, and DataGrip completes the whole clause for you. By the way, after you've completed this clause, you can see that the actor ID and last update columns are colored in yellow, which actually means that they are now ambiguous. The Alt-Enter shortcut will help us again here. I want to qualify all of the columns, not just one, so I select all of them, press Alt-Enter, choose Qualify Identifier, and if there are conflicts, DataGrip gives me the option to choose which particular alias or table I want to use for qualification. Now let's return to the Expand Column List functionality. If you expand the column list in the query where there are join clauses, DataGrip actually knows about the conflicts and all the ambiguous columns will be qualified. If you want all of the columns to be qualified after this operation, there's a dedicated setting for this. One last note about code completion. A particularly useful thing about code completion is that it supports abbreviations. For example, if you want to put order by here, you can just type OB. And if you want to then use the film ID column, you can just type FID, which is the abbreviation for it. After finishing my query, I press Command-Alt-L, which will format it according to my code style. If you want to specify the code style, go to Settings and find where to specify it or the particular language. As you can see, my PostgreSQL style inherits the general SQL style, which is okay for me. There are many clauses and options for these clauses, meaning you can create the style you actually need. Our next chapter is inspections. DataGrip analyzes your queries before you run them and highlights the errors on the fly. One of the most important inspections shows you whether you have unresolved references in your code. For example, if I change the reference actor to actor_1, DataGrip will highlight it in red because DataGrip doesn't know about this object in my database, and the columns of this unknown table will also be highlighted. Another inspection analyzes whether a condition you are using is always true. Analyzing your insert statements, DataGrip can alert you if the number of columns you want to insert doesn't match the target location. One more inspection, perhaps the most important one, will warn you if you are about to delete all the data from your table. Let's create another select query in our query console. As you can see, I again use abbreviations for code completion and code formatter. When you run queries in DataGrip, you don't need to select the code because DataGrip actually understands where your caret is. So if you have several queries in your console, DataGrip will show you a list of the possible queries you can run. Here we have the current query or the whole script. Let's create a query with a subquery. By the way, inspection again helps you at this point because each derived table should have an alias. So we add this alias via Alt-Enter. Then if you have your caret inside this subquery, when you run the query, DataGrip offers you the choice of running the subquery, the whole query, or the whole script. By clicking Customize, you will be navigated to the settings where you can actually adjust the execute action or create another execute action. Let's do this. For instance, I want this second execute action to always run the whole script without a chooser. So I select this option, I choose the appropriate shortcut, for example, Control-Command-Enter, and then I can use it. Let's see how it works. Now I go back to my query console, put the cursor into the first query, and if I use my second shortcut, which is Command-Control-Enter, the whole script is run without the chooser. But if I use the first shortcut for running the query, which by default is Command-Enter, the chooser appears. What else is in the query console? We have the ability to show a statement's execution plan using explain plan. Just use the context menu and invoke it. By default, the plan is displayed in tree mode, but you can actually switch to diagram mode if that's more familiar for you. The weight of the arrow shows whether the cost is high. Now let's take a look at refactorings. In this query, I don't like the fa alias, so I can put the caret there, press Shift F6, and just type a new name for it. As you can see, the name's been changed everywhere this alias is used. There's another way to rename the alias without using the refactoring action. If you change the name of the alias inside the text, the gutter icon will suggest changing the name everywhere the alias is used. I can also use the refactoring action to rename the actor table. I press Shift F6, and I see the dialog. In this dialog, I specify the new name and the scope where DataGrip should search for references. I don't want to modify my file scripts, which is why I choose only the data source in the scope section. This way, the source codes of other projects will be modified by the rename. When I click Preview, DataGrip tells me that this table is going to be renamed in the console files and also in several views. Once I've inspected these changes, I press Do Refactor. While the table itself and its usages in the console file have been renamed, the source code of the views needs to be inspected and submitted. With the help of Find Action, Command-Shift-A, I call up the window called Database Changes, which displays all of the source codes that are going to be updated. In my case, I have only one view, Actors and Films. I can look at the differences between my new version and the database version before submitting these changes. Then I click Submit, inspect the changes in the preview window, and click OK to update the view. Let's make sure that everything's fine and check the updated source code of this view. As we can see, the Actor New table is now used here. Let's go back to our query console and look at the option to name tabs. You can write a comment before each query. For instance, I have the comment here, tab number 1, and near the second query, tab number 2. Oh, and by the way, the Spellchecker thinks that number 2 is not a word, and you can see its suggestions using Alt-Enter. You'll notice, though, that the Spellchecker in DataGrip can actually understand camel case. So if I capitalize the T, everything's fine. Now, if you run these queries, the comments become the names of your result tabs. We now have 2 results, and we're able to compare them using this tiny button called Compare. When you click it, you'll see a list of all the result sets from the whole of DataGrip. If you want to compare tab number 2 with tab number 1, you can do this, and as a result, you'll see the diff viewer for the 2 datasets. When you look at the results, you'll see they're placed in the Services tool window. In the left part of this window, there's a list of connections. Every connection has its own node under the corresponding data source and its own client. By default, one console has one connection. Another important piece of information here is the time required for the most recent query. If I run my query again, I see that this time is updated. The time it took to run your query can also be displayed on the tooltip on the success icon near the query. You can also toggle in editor result mode. In this mode, the result will appear just under the query, inside your query console or file. This can be especially useful if you hide all the other windows and create a flow where you can see which particular result belongs to each query. Navigation. Every object from the database used in your SQL is actually a link. Clicking on an object while pressing Command will take you to the DDL editor. This doesn't just work for tables, it works for all objects, including columns. If you don't like using the mouse, you can press Command B, which will do the same thing. This action is called Go to Declaration. For tables and views, you can press F4 if you want to navigate to data directly. And if you want to highlight an object in the database tree, press Alt-Shift-B. You can use the quick documentation to see information about the table without using navigation actions. The shortcut for this is F1. This pop-up will show you the DDL of the table and its first 10 rows of data. Let's go back to the data editor to check out what this DataGrip component can do and how it can help you work with your data. You can click on columns to sort the data. You can put new values here. You can also edit multiple cells at a time. Just select several cells and input the value. If the value is long, completion can help you. Just press Control-Space, and you can see what values are already in this particular column. Copy-paste. You can copy the data you need and then paste it anywhere in the editor. This actually works via the CSV in the clipboard. So for example, if you have an external CSV, you can copy it and paste it into the data editor in DataGrip. DataGrip tries to understand the format of your clipboard automatically. But if you want to specify the format of the CSV or TSV in your clipboard, you can do so using the options under the gear icon. Not only can you update rows, you can also delete them and add new ones. To review the changes you're going to make, you can press the DML button. This will show you the queries that are going to be run to make your changes. When I press Submit, I see that my changes aren't being applied because there were some problems with the new row I added and the row I deleted. So I can revert the changes I want to revert, and all the rest can be submitted to the database. Navigation. You can navigate within your data if you have foreign key relations established in your database. For example, I have an actor whose ID is 2. I call up the context menu, use Go to Related Data, and then I can see a list of relation tables for the actor table. If I choose a relation table, I need film_actor. I see the data of this table in all the films in which the actor with ID number 2 appeared. So if I'm interested in film 105, I can press Command Down, which is the shortcut for Go to Related Data, go to the film table, and see what film it is. In this case, it's Boss Warshank. And I can go in the opposite direction as well. I press Command Down on the ID number of the film and go to the film_actor relation table. There I can see all the actors who appeared in the film. Next, I want to know more about the actor with ID number 43. I press Command Down, and I'm taken to the actor table with a particular row selected, and this is Kurt Jovovich. Now I know that he was once on set with Nick Wahlberg. Filtering. In this field above the data, you can input the filtering clause. It has the same syntax as the where clause, just without the where keyword. Every time you apply a new filter, a new query is actually executed to fetch the needed data. There's also an option to search for data on the client side without running a new query. To do this, use text search by pressing Command F. You can either display only the filtered rows or all the rows with the rows you need highlighted. You should keep in mind that this only searches within the current page of the results set. To configure the size of the page, use the corresponding drop-down on the toolbar. Here you can choose the page size or ask DataGrip to display all the rows of the result or table. If you choose all, the search will respect all the data from this table. More complicated searches with the means of the database can be performed with a full text search. So invoke it and create the condition you need. You can also select the objects where you need to perform the search. This can be the entire schema or just 2 tables. If I select 2 tables, I have 2 targets for the search. When I perform it, I see the particular tables in which my data is found. Here it's found in 2 tables. Then when I click on the customer table, I see the rows that contain the data I'm looking for. By the way, you can work with the structure of the dataset if the set itself is too wide to view all at once. Press Command F12 and you will see a list of columns. You can now search for specific columns. You just start typing. You can also hide columns and show columns for this kind of dataset. Use the space key to do so. And don't worry, you always have the option to reset the view. Let's go back to our data editor and see what useful things are located on the toolbar. Here's the paging, which we've already discussed. It allows you to set the page size to your desired specifications. This is the reload button. That's pretty clear. These buttons help you add and delete rows, and the transaction control dropdown lets you toggle between automatic mode and manual mode. In manual mode, changes are stored in a transaction to the database. When you press commit, transactions are committed to the database. The DDL button will show you the DDL of the object. That's pretty simple. And this is the compare button. We've already mentioned it. It lets you compare any data set with any other data set that's already open in DataGrip. This list is very important. Here we have data extractors, which determine the format for exporting data. For example, let's start with an SQL insert extractor. If I choose it, select some data, and press copy, the SQL insert extractor format will be applied for my clipboard. So when I paste this data somewhere else, I see that it's represented as a group of insert statements. Let's try another data extractor, for example, JSON. It works the same way. You copy your data, and when you paste it, you see that this data is now represented in the needed format. CSV and TSV extractors are pretty common. If you want to configure them, you should press here and tick all the options you need. You may notice that some data extractors are called scripted. This means that these are just scripts. You can click Go to Scripts directory to see where these scripts are located. You can update or edit these scripts, and you can even create your own extractors. Data extractors are used not only for copying to your clipboard, but also to export your data to a file. Click on the Export button, and you'll see the dialog window, where you can choose the extractor, enter the file name to be created, or push the Copy to Clipboard button. This button will actually copy the whole data set to the clipboard, not just the selected part. The next button is Copy to Database. You can export any data set to the new table of any database. For example, I want to export my table actor from the PostgreSQL database to SQL Server database. I type the DBO schema here, which is my schema in the SQL Server database, press OK, and see the preview, where the new DDL for SQL Server will be created. I also specify the name for my new table. I press Import, and voila, I have a new table in my SQL Server database. This trick can be performed not only with tables, but also with the results set. For instance, let's create a new query and get some results. Now I again use the Copy to Database button to create a new table for my results. I enter the name for this new table, press Import, and I have a table again. This can be really useful when the operation to retrieve a result takes a really long time, but you frequently want to manipulate the data or query it afterwards. The ability to copy tables is pretty useful for making small backups. I can just drag and drop my actor table to the same schema, and I have a duplicate of it. I press Import, and my actor backup table is created. In DataGrip, if you want to change the table, you can invoke the Modify Table window. In this window, you can make all sorts of changes, like changing the type of fields, creating the primary key, and creating foreign keys. And all of these changes will be reflected as an SQL script. This script can be performed immediately, or you can just paste it to the editor where you're working. The same functionality is used to create objects. If you create the table, you can use the UI and the SQL script will be generated for you. Creating views is also straightforward. Just use the context menu, New View, and specify the name of the view and the query that this view uses. In DataGrip, you can generate SQL for existing objects. To do this, use Context Menu, SQL Scripts, SQL Generator. In the tool window that opens, you'll see the generated script, and there's a variety of options you can tick here. For example, create if not exist, ignore owner, and many others. Like many other actions in DataGrip, the SQL generator can be invoked using a shortcut, which is useful if you want to generate the script for an object from your SQL code. Just put the cursor on the object and press Command-Alt-G. The script can be generated not only for one object, but also for several objects or for the entire schema. So here's an example of code generated for my public schema. Next, I can save the generated code to disk. I press the Save button, choose the path, and choose the layout. For instance, file per object. Let's ensure that the files are generated and that every object has its own SQL file. While generating SQL for the entire schema can be really helpful when you want to export your database to some other server, for PostgreSQL and MySQL, there's an integration with the pgdump and MySQL-dump native tools. I can call up the context menu, click on Export with pgdump, specify the path for pgdump, and get my backup. And of course, if you already have the dump made with pgdump, you can also restore it from the context menu. For the next chapter, where we'll be talking about editing the source code of procedures and views, I want to create a duplicate data source in DataGrip. I do this by pressing Command-D and inputting the new password. These two data sources, myPGDatabase and myPGDatabase2, actually point to the same database. Let's try to update the source code of the routine film in stock. When I double-click on it, I see the source code editor window. First, I make some changes to the source code. Then after I click Submit, DataGrip generates the migration script which applies my changes. I press OK, and the changes are applied. The source code of the view is updated. It's important to note that DataGrip caches the source codes of all the objects from your database to provide very fast coding assistance and navigation. So if I go to my second data source and open the same routine, DataGrip warns me that the object has been updated from a third-party location. In my case, this is just another data source. DataGrip then offers to synchronize the source codes for me. After clicking Synchronize, I see that the changes made in the first data source have been made here as well. This means that the source code is up to date. Let's delete this change but not submit it, and then change some other routine as well. You can change several routines without submitting, which means you can accumulate your changes and then submit them all at once. I've already mentioned the Database Changes tool window. If you invoke it, you'll see all the routines that have pending changes. You can review these changes with the help of the diff viewer. Then, when you press Submit, DataGrip generates the migration code for you. Once you press OK, the database will contain your new code. When you edit source code, the features of the IntelliJ platform's text editor, which DataGrip is built on, help you do some repetitive tasks with less hassle. Let's take a look at these features. Command backspace will delete the whole line. You don't need to select it. Command D will duplicate the line. Command / will comment on the line, or, if you select several lines, on all of them. As I've already mentioned, you can reformat the code according to your code style at any time. Another handy feature is multiple cursors. This is often the most efficient way to modify SQL code in DataGrip. To use this feature, place the cursor at the desired location, press Alt twice and hold it, and then place new cursors with the help of the arrow keys. Now you can make changes to several lines as if you were just editing one line. Another way to place multiple cursors is to use text search. Just search for the needed word, choose Select All Occurrences to the right of the search text field, and edit the lines. And by the way, if you use text search, try Control Space in the search field. This will display the words from this particular file. Let's talk about the Files tool window, one of the most important tool windows in DataGrip. If you open it with the help of the Command 2 shortcut, it will appear on the right-hand side of the screen. In the Files tool window, you can actually see your work files from any folder on your local computer. To open, or as we say, attach, a folder to this tool window, just use the button and select the folder you need. As an example, I attached the MyScripts folder, and then I could see the content of this folder in the Files tool window. So I open the queries.sql file, which contains the simple select, and DataGrip tells me that there's no SQL dialect configured for this file. I set the dialect to PostgreSQL, and then I can run my query from this file in the context of every open session I have. I can use the existing session, or I can create a new session for any of my data sources. Then I specify the schema, and my file begins to understand the context. So for example, if I'm writing code here, code completion and all the other coding assistance features work. I run this query and get the result. If I make changes in the file, for example, if I add a new query, the gutter, the panel on the left-hand side of the text editor, displays a green stripe. This indicates that there are differences between this version and the one in the version control system. And if I click on it, I can open the diff viewer, which shows me the changes. Next, I commit my changes with the help of the Git UI in DataGrip. Not only can I commit, but I can commit and push all at once. In addition to my work files with selects, I also have the dump files for various databases. For example, here, in this folder for MySQL, I have dump files. This Scikila schema file has the statements that create the schema of the objects. And the Scikila data file has statements which insert data into that new schema. I can open them and run them just like usual files. But since these are quite large and managing them isn't so easy, the better way to run them is to use run configurations. To do this, I select two files, go to the context menu, and create a run configuration for them from this menu. In the dialog window that appears, I change the order of these files because schema creation needs to be first. Then I choose the target and press run, and all the scripts from these files are executed against the needed target. There are some errors during execution, but DataGrip moves past them. You can review all these errors after the execution is finished. To see whether the result was successful, we'll make sure that the tables were created and that the data is there. If you just drag and drop your DDL file straight to the database tree, a so-called DDL data source will be created there. This DDL data source obviously doesn't contain data, it just represents your DDL file as a data source in the database tree. The DDL data source can be created from any file that contains object definitions. Let's create a new file and put the table definition into it. Then we'll create the DDL data source from this single file with the single table. As you can see, our small database structure with a table, called new_table, is represented in the database tree as a data source. In another file, I'll write a query using this new table. So as you can see, code completion understands that this object exists, and you can even expand the column list from it. Another important aspect of working with files is editing files with data. If you open a CSV file in DataGrip, you can use the Text tab, which is just a tab for plain text, or the Data tab, which will represent the CSV as a table. In this table, you can update values, and these changes will be reflected in the actual content of the file. Another general task for database users is importing CSV into the database. This can be done pretty easily in DataGrip. You can just drag and drop your CSV file into the particular schema of the needed data source. The Import Data dialog lets you specify the format and preview the data. In our case, everything is fine, so I can just press Import and bring my new table into my data source. Let's talk about how DataGrip helps you avoid losing your work. First, every file you work with is automatically saved. You don't need to manually save anything. As an example, I've closed all the tabs except the current one. And if I want to reopen some of them, I can go to Recent Files via Command E and reopen any tab. It can be a console file or just a file from my local computer that I've worked with. Another useful feature is Recent Locations. This can be invoked using Command-Shift-E. It shows you the snippets of text you've recently looked at. And this could be a couple of minutes ago or maybe even 2 hours ago. As in Recent Files, speed search works here as well, so you can type any text here and navigate to the place where this text was used. Local history. Every time you type in the file, DataGrip saves it. It doesn't matter whether you store your files under VCS or not, DataGrip remembers all the changes locally. You can review these changes and revert to a previous version if you'd like. The local history feature also works on folder contents. For example, I delete these 2 files, and then if I go to the local history of the folder, I can bring them back. All queries you run from the console are stored in the console history. You can see it by clicking this small button on the toolbar. You can visually find the needed query, or again, use speed search. Pressing Enter on the query will paste it into the editor. If you're interested in all the queries that have been executed from DataGrip, open the SQL log. This file contains all the queries that have been run from DataGrip by the user or by DataGrip itself. Clipboard history. If you press Shift-Command-V, anything you've ever copied to the clipboard can be pasted to the editor. Now we'll move on to the next part of our video, navigation and search. Double Shift allows you to search everywhere. You can use this if you just don't know where to search for something inside the IDE. For example, you can use this to search for files. Just type part of the file name or the abbreviation and navigate to the file you need. Here in the All tab, you can also search for database objects like routines or tables. You can search for actions as well, and this comes in handy if you want to find something but you can't remember the shortcut for Find Action. If you know precisely what you're looking for, use the dedicated tabs of this search. The Database tab actually includes all the other major objects made from the database, like routines or views. Command-O is the shortcut for this tab. In my case, I have too many objects with similar names, so I specify the data source where I want to search. Clicking on a table opens it. You can also navigate to other major objects from the Database tab. For example, you can search for routines here as well. The Files tab searches for files, obviously. Command-Shift-O will bring it up. The Symbols tab will show you everything that DataGrip knows about in your database. If you're searching for indexes, columns, or constraints, they can all be found here. And the last tab is Actions, and Command-Shift-A is the shortcut. This is particularly helpful if you don't remember the shortcut or the menu item for a particular action. As an example, I'm showing you how to create a Scratch file using the Find Action interface. It's also possible to search through the content of the files. We call this feature Find in Files, and the shortcut for it is Shift-Command-F. It's particularly noteworthy that DataGrip can search not only through the contents of the user files, but the content of the source code of the objects. This is possible because DataGrip caches all the source codes of your databases. For instance, if you want to find a piece of code inside your view or routine, you can use Find in Files to do so. In my example, I want to know which source codes use the film ID column. I choose the data source that I need, and then I can look at the source codes with this column. One of these objects is the actor info view. If I click on it, I see its source code containing the required text. The last chapter of our video covers the plugin ecosystem. If DataGrip for some reason can't do something you want it to, there may be a plugin that has what you want. You can search for plugins in our marketplace. As you can see, I already have several plugins installed, for example, various color themes. You can find more of them using the search function. The string manipulation plugin will help you do more powerful things with strings. The Chinese language plugin will translate the IDE for you. And the bash support plugin will help you if you use bash scripts. That's all we wanted to share with you in this video. If you want to learn more about how DataGrip works, please visit our website, tweet at us, or send us an email at datagrip@jetbrains.com. We're always glad to hear your feedback. Thank you and goodbye.